All right, we are live on Facebook. It's Friday night. We're recording. Time to talk triathlon
It's
and
Friday
evidence-based
night.
triathlon.
We're 15 days away from my first 70.3 in like 18
Oh,
months. I'm
wow.
nervous.
Yeah.
I just Googled the weather in St. George for tomorrow because I'm like, maybe I should go up for the weekend. And it's funny because, one of the things I was looking at going up there was to revisit Snow Canyon
Oh, yeah.
because I can't decide on my chain rings.
Ah, what are
I
you thinking? I mean, what's your
well,
decision between?
right now on my time trial bike, I've got a 5542
Okay.
with an 1128 in the back,
That's a
and
big, that's a big gear.
that's a big boy chain ring. I'm
Yeah.
not, but it's what I've had on it for a while. But it's really been since last summer that I've had that on since we were doing the time trials.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, so when you're in the 5511, what are the conditions when you get to your 5511? Like,
Like
is
how
it,
fast do I need to be going?
yeah,
Well, that maxes out for me around like pedaling. I start to spin out around 37 miles an hour.
okay, okay.
And with the 53, which is my other choice, it's probably just a couple miles an hour less.
Mm-hmm. So when you do find yourself in the 5511, when you're not doing 37 miles per hour, or do you, or are you just going with a slower cadence? Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, so if I, for example, if I needed to, are you saying if I needed to? Oh, I see what you're saying.
Do
So
you find yourself
if
in the
I'm at
5511?
5511 and I'm happy, sweet spot, like my 70 RPM,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm probably doing 29 to 30 miles an hour.
Okay. So that's interesting because we weren't going to get into this part of it, but that you do tend to use less oxygen at the lower cadences.
Yeah,
So,
and I race at a low cadence, 72, 74.
oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and there's some good research. We were not going to talk about this at all. There's some good research on running off the bike too, that lower cadence is better
Yeah.
for you running off the bike.
Mhm.
We used to think, oh, you got to get your cadence up, but
Right.
that's been some of the research I've read, not necessarily a thing. And
Mhm.
what kind of sparked my interest in it was Daniela Reef
Yeah.
and her like 65 cadence
Mhm.
efforts, and then she gets off and she can run like the wind.
Mhm.
And that's the whole purple patch Matt Dixon theory is we ride low cadence. And
Okay.
I'm when I started doing it, the only problem is, John, when I started doing it, it actually creates a lot of stress on your knee.
Mhm.
I went a little bit too aggressive into it, and I struggled with some like
Mm.
patellofemoral problems in the beginning. But now I'm used to it. I can slog along at 70 RPM, 72 RPM
Yeah.
at race wattage pretty comfortably.
That is, let me see. I'll check my Strava real quick. I tend to be a very low. I don't
Yeah,
focus on it, but that's what my cadence is.
I've ridden with you.
I'll never get above 80.
You're definitely a low cadence guy,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's interesting too. Like I said, we were going to talk about this, but everyone started to go to high cadence because Lance Armstrong did,
Mm-hmm.
right? But triathletes are not Lance Armstrong, although he was a great triathlete.
Yeah.
But everyone is different, and everyone has their own individual physiology. And
Mm-hmm.
I've been personally way more successful going low cadence. It keeps your heart rate lower.
Yeah.
And once you've done the work and you've built up that muscular endurance,
Yeah.
I think it's a win-win. So what did you find out?
I like today was a harder ride, and I was, high 70s, low 80s, and that was a hard ride, and just because I was time crunched and I needed to get it done.
Yeah.
But no, I am pretty much in the 70s for cadence. So
Okay, so I'm gonna look at my ride today too, because I actually was not paying attention at all to cadence, so it's probably a good one to look at. So let me see mine for today. I'm gonna guess I was low 70s, and I was just right, and I was it's a little off because I'd commuted, and so it's riding in the city, and so and that's something that I probably would never even look at, riding in the city. So yeah, 75
Yeah,
today.
yeah,
And that's road bike in the city.
yeah.
It's a
That's
little bit.
mine's 75 right here. So
How about
yeah,
that?
yeah. No, I've always thought low cadence is the way to go, but from a very physiological perspective. But
But that's why you can rock a bigger chain ring too, right? Like
yeah, right.
I ride a 55-42, and people look at me and they're like, man, you're 5'8" and you got a 29-inch inseam. Like, you shouldn't be riding that. I'm like, actually, I think I should be.
Yeah.
And so anyways, why I was thinking about going up to do Snow Canyon is last time I was there, I'm pretty sure I know I was actually on oval chain rings. And so I can't really look at the data. I know the size, but they're just messed up. Like, you can't compare a 39 to a 39.
Right.
And so I was like, maybe I should go ride Snow Canyon and just see, because now it's really it's the small chain ring that's important, right? And I can't decide if the 42 will be better or the 39, and and that's 2 hours into that ride.
Yeah, right.
So I'm considering
That's
still.
such a great route, though. I mean,
That is one of the best 70.3 routes you could possibly do.
Because you hit it hard in the beginning with that one big hill, coming out of Sand Hollow, and then you get some flat, but then you get some rolling hills that.
And those are good little challenging rolling hills. They're not just rolling. There's some.
Yep.
You get up, stand up, and. I was watching a lot of video from the Galveston race because I had some friends racing, and then I watched some of the stuff with some people posted. I'm like, man, that looks so horrible.
Well,
riding
Daytona, I mean, people are talking about Daytona as being the next big event, but I don't know. I actually think that after you have that race for a few times, it's so flat that yes, the appeal of being able to see people may actually not be as exciting when you don't have those little intermixes of hills and what have you. So I don't know. That's interesting.
So I mean, we're going all over the place today. So we're gonna talk a little tech, just because something today too. I was watching this guy on YouTube this morning as I was doing my mobility work. I usually get up in the morning, do some mobility work, and I've been watching some YouTube videos. And this guy, he's a KOM hunter. That's what we'll call him. He had this drone that was following him using radar.
Oh.
So this thing, I have to buy one of these. So the camera always stayed on him.
Yeah.
And the drone, the drone was going around trees. It was missing power lines. And it followed him for 20 minutes. And then it ran out of batteries, and it does an emergency and it sits down. And I was just like, this is the coolest thing ever. But then I start thinking about like triathlon coverage.
Yeah.
Like, if battery life could get good enough, every pro athlete could have one of these little drones. I think this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You could have a drone following each individual athlete. And it might not be live, because I don't think they have the ability to do that live, but who cares, right? I can wait an hour or 2 hours to see a race.
Yeah.
And because you can get some good stuff on the bike or on the run. It's a little bit easier. But man, I was like, this is really super cool. And I was like, man, I wish I would have had that when I Everested.
Yeah, right.
Like this drone going up, and then it like spins around you, and wow, man, I was like, that's
pretty amazing. It is pretty amazing.
Yeah. So there's our tech update is cool drone stuff.
Yeah. We're not far off from that. Okay, now Paul is saying in the comments that the early part of the race around Sand Hollow is different for the 70.3. So
it's different this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're putting a new road in.
Oh, okay.
So, and supposedly, I don't even know if it's open yet. They said it's going to open at the end of April.
Okay.
And the race is May 1st. So when you make the climb up.
Yeah.
And you take the right-hand turn when you get the top.
Yeah. Okay.
so we're going to still make that right hand turn, and then we're going to go to the T, do a U-turn,
Mm,
come back, and then take a right. So that road that basically goes up the hill is now going to go straight out to the highway.
okay.
So they basically have extended Southern Hills Parkway.
Yeah. Okay.
And so yeah, it's a little different, but I'm with you. Like, I think that course there's so much to it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you like riding bikes,
Yeah.
like, and you enjoy the
Mm-hmm.
change
Yep.
and the scenery, and actually I really don't care about the scenery when I'm riding, to be honest with you.
Timing, and you get the speed coming down. I mean, it's got a little bit of everything.
It is, and you know, the cool thing is, if you look at the times, pros or age groupers, they're not that fast, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
downhill course,
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
which tells you something. Like, it's a challenging
Mm-hmm.
course. Like, you know, pros are going 210, 215, which is pretty typical,
Mm-hmm.
but not in a net downhill.
Well, that can always be a windy course, and you never know which way you're going to get that wind.
That's true.
So,
There's no hiding from the wind on that course.
no,
You're
and
absolutely right.
being largely point to point, you're
You could literally have a headwind almost the entire time. Yeah, no, you're
Mhm.
definitely right on that. But I also think, like, in the pro group, in particular, that there's not a draft train
Mhm.
because of the undulation, right? Because
Yeah.
that's the other thing at Galveston. There was a draft train of pros. Like, it was 5 pros all in a line, and they rode the entire time in this line.
Mhm.
That's boring,
Yep.
you know.
And I think the last world championship at 70.3, didn't Sebi get caught for drafting? And it was just one of those situations where you're coming down one hill, going up
Yep.
another.
And you
And it was,
fall into the draft zone,
yeah.
and you know, and I actually think there's something that needs to be changed in pro triathlon, is number one, the slotting in issue,
Mhm.
right? Because if you got 10 guys in a line, you can't
Mhm.
pass all 10.
No.
Not how fast these guys are going, you know, and the wattage they're putting out.
Mhm.
I think it's impossible.
Yeah.
And then I really think in the pros, they have to change to a 20-meter draft rule.
Yeah. Right.
10 meters is at the speeds those guys are going.
Mhm.
You know, at Galveston, when they had the downwind section, they were going 37 to 39 miles an hour.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, when you're going that fast, the amount of wind and
Yeah.
that's being blocked. Yeah. So,
Just even if it's just a little bit, it's going to help.
well, no one's riding away. Like, and that's the other thing, is it used to be there was, you know, some really, really strong bikers, but everyone's strong now.
Yeah. Right.
No one can ride off the front.
Men and women, it's amazing the times they're doing, and then run the times that they're running off the bike. So, but maybe it has to do with what crank arm length they're using.
Well, it absolutely could do that. So let me ask you a question. What crank arm length do you ride?
Well, I use 172.5. I used to, in my younger days, do 175. And I remember when I started getting back into it, I actually had a hard time finding 175s. And so I went to 172.5 because I could not find 175s.
Yep.
But now I'm like, okay, 172.5 is probably right. In fact, what we were just talking about coming into this podcast is I'd like to try even shorter crank arm length, so crank lengths. Yep.
So
So,
I ride 170s.
mhm.
And when I was fit for my bike, the bike fitter that I worked with, he's like, you know what? You really should go shorter.
Shorter. Yeah.
And I have subsequently measured myself, and they're online, for those that are watching, there are several good websites that you can find that you can actually measure what your optimal crank arm length is based off of your inseam.
Mm-hmm.
And they all say I should be 165
Yeah.
because I have a really short inseam. And the fitter, I mean, he didn't measure my inseam. He just watched me, and he couldn't convince me, because, like, I'm like, man, I don't want to be the odd guy out,
Mm-hmm.
right? I don't want to be the, you know, I'm on 172.5s. I'm riding big boy stuff.
Right.
And so he convinced me at least to go to 170s, and I'm glad he did. But I would like nothing more if I could wave a magic wand at my time trial bike sitting right there to have it 165. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, that's $1,000 change.
Yeah.
But I would absolutely do it in a heartbeat if I could. You know, the other thing, just another little anecdote. I was fortunate enough in Chattanooga at the World Championships to be invited into this group, and Tim Reed was there,
Okay.
and it was for Hot Shot.
Oh, right.
So he's sponsored by them, and I got invited in, and so we're running with him, and we're just chatting, and I just asked him, I'm like, just wondering, because he's about the same height I am. He's pretty short, and I'm like, what's your crank arm length? And he's like, 165, and he's like, I wish I could go to 162.5, but the company that sponsored him for his cranks and power meter, they didn't have,
Oh,
because the smallest they made.
mm.
And he's like, I'm so much better. Like my hips I have less hip issues. I run better off of a shorter crank arm. Like, and that was the first time I'm like, well, he was the world champion at the time.
Yep.
So I'm like, if it's good enough for him, it probably would be good enough for me.
Worth trying.
And then, but subsequently, like, I don't know. I need to do it. Like, for sure, my next bike, it's going to be 165s or
right. So we've thrown out numbers: 165, 175. I've known people to ride 200s. So that number, do people know what that number represents? So
go ahead and describe it for them.
So it's the length. It seems so obvious, but it's the length of the crank in millimeters from the center of the crank where it rotates around to where the center of the pedal spindle. And so we're talking millimeters. So 175 millimeters, so 17.5 centimeters. All right, so in US units, I should Google that real quick.
Oh,
convert 70.
As a Canadian, I should be able to do this off the top of my head. So
let me quickly bring up our conversion.
15 millimeters is about 6 inches.
2.5.
15 centimeters. 15 centimeters is about 6 inches.
Okay. So yeah, I always say that's 5 centimeters, and then 10. So we're talking 175 centimeters, and that is inches. No,
that's about 7, right?
Yep, 6.889. So about 7 inches, and so we're talking about a 175 versus a 172.5 millimeters, 6.79.
It's not big changes.
It's not big changes. And so I think that's important to recognize. On one hand, it's like, oh, that's, 175 to 172.5 or 165. That can sound like, sorry, I've got someone interfering here.
Yes, photobomb.
He's just exploring. But in reality, we're talking differences in millimeters. So it's not a big change when we're talking 170. That's why 172.5 versus 175, I was like, okay, I'll go with the 172.5. So I'm not going to split that, because I could maybe change something else and really not have any impact. But
for me, if my optimal is 165 and I'm at 170, now we're talking half a centimeter.
Yeah, right. Now we're getting, yeah.
But I think it's important that people recognize it's a half a centimeter on both sides.
Yep.
So what it means is when you're on the top of your pedal stroke,
yep,
it's half centimeter, and on the bottom it's a half centimeter. So all the way around, it's 1 centimeter difference.
Yep.
And 1 centimeter is, well, just under half an inch.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start to actually diagram these things out, and I've seen this done with like AutoCAD and looking at hip angle, and that's the big thing, is hip angle.
Yep.
The hip angle changes when you start doing these things can be actually quite significant. When you change like a half a centimeter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to me, that's the advantage. Is it's all about hip angle.
Right. No, that's right. And I think that's going to be, I think that's the part that we need to bring out tonight, is that issue of why you would want to go shorter crank arm lengths is because of what's happening at the hip angle. Yeah. So with now, I mean, there are crank arms now at 120. I mean, that's extreme, but in the laboratory, that's a very common crank. Well, it's a crank arm length that people have tested.
Yeah,
common necessarily, because you've got to get a special crank arm to be able to do that test.
But commonly available just in the market now is probably like on a high end. I don't even know if I was to look at a top end like Dura Ace or SRAM Red. I think 162.5 all the way up to, you know, for track cyclists, it goes quite a bit higher.
Mm-hmm.
There's a pretty wide range. But the interesting thing is, John, like it's probably when you got back into the sport and when I got into the sport, every bike was standard 172.5.
That's right. That's right.
My wife's bike, 172.5. My bike, 172.5. My friend that is 5'3" and on an extra small frame, 172.5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was ubiquitous. I don't know, since I started into the sport till just a few years ago.
No, and like I said, I had a hard time finding 175s, and I was just, you know, and so I went with 172.5 because that's what was common. But back when I was riding before, I'd have to look and see if that was the case. But 175 was just what came with the bikes at that point. So,
and I get it from like a bike manufacturer standpoint. Just put everybody the same.
Yeah, right.
They're buying in bulk from a distributor. It's probably cheaper for them to buy all the same. They need less in the warehouse, and you know, and if you think about it, you ship these all out to these bike shops all over the place. Make them the same.
Yep. Now, you also said something earlier about, well, you'd like to do 165, but it would cost $1,000, and that's because
the power meter.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so another, you know, because even if I switch to pedals, I'm more than $1,000. I got to buy a new crank.
Yeah.
Which, you know, to get a nice aero crank, I'm looking at $300-400. Power meter, pedals.
Yep.
Let's say I just do a single side, that's $600-700. I'm over $1,000.
Yep.
And to make a centimeter difference, right?
Right.
But now it's, you know, it's interesting because you had me read this paper, and now it's in my head. I'm riding my bike today, and I'm just like, oh man, I'd be so much better off with 165. Oh.
Well, I'm doing the same thing because reading, you know, we'll mention the paper in just a second here. It all of a sudden opens up more possibilities because one of the things that the shorter crank arm does is it gives you less hip movement, which is less of the thigh jamming up into your gut.
Yes.
And so as you know, I've always struggled with, you know, gut problems especially on longer rides. And I started wondering, well, I wonder if this would help if I went to much shorter crank and maybe even try like a 160 or 155. I know that sounds crazy, but maybe that is something that would physiologically not interfere with what's happening in the gut. So
you think about it, John, it's actually both sides. So it's the jamming up, but it's also the pulling down. So a lot of people aren't aware of, and we talked about psoas last week actually, but the psoas muscle that, you know, it actually goes from your femur up into your back. There are fibers that actually attach, I know for sure, to the appendix, because there's actually a psoas sign for appendicitis.
Right.
The appendix is attached to the large intestine.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming, now it's been a long time since I took my gross anatomy class, unfortunately, and got and really looked at, and even at the time, I honestly didn't look at that, but I'm sure there's fascial connection between the psoas and that. So think about on the way down, you're pulling, actually pulling your intestine. So if you're reaching, you know, your hip angle's opening more, because it will also open more on the bottom side with the longer crank arm.
Right.
Interesting.
I know. So I may just get a shorter and just put it on and try it without, but I won't have power at that point because I'm in the same boat. I've got my power meter on my crank. And so it's sort of, you know,
what we need to do is, here's an idea for us. I got a great idea for us. We need to post this in the Las Vegas Triathlon Club exchange.
Marketplace.
We'd like to get in on a crank arm length exchange program.
Oh, there you go.
Just see, like, you know, so we could all try different crank arms.
Yeah.
Right? And just be like, okay, you know, as a group, we're going to buy 10 crank arms with power meters.
Yeah.
And just keep rolling them around till you find the one that
That's right.
fits you and you're good with. Because that's the problem. Like, so you do this, right? You buy the 165 and
Yeah.
you feel like, actually it's not right for me. I don't like it. It's
Yeah.
not, there's no difference. Well, then your only option is to sell it to me, and
Yeah.
I'm only going to give you like 50%.
That's right. Right.
If you're lucky.
Hmm. Yeah, but it'd be a little bit like musical chairs, though. If you get 10
You don't want
people,
to be stuck
10
with
different
4 of
cranks.
them.
You want to make that choice early.
Exactly.
Well, let's talk about this paper
Yeah, perfect.
that we read, and I'll give a little bit of a background. So I was listening to John Thorne's podcast, Faster, and that's an excellent podcast. He does a lot of interviews with industry individuals, and really has a focus on cycling specifically. And John Thorne is owner of Flow Cycling, so that's neat. And he interviewed a colleague that we have, Dr. Jim Martin, who's up in Utah. And I've known Jim for a number of years, and Jim does a lot of research in cycling. And if you're a Slow Twitch follower, he is Bio McGeek, and so he's very well respected in the Slow Twitch world as well. And so really has a strong reputation of being a good scientist, good cyclist as well. And he even created a recumbent bike for his desk so he could work and bike at the same time.
I like it.
But mostly to lose weight, because I talked with him about that. And he said it wasn't really a training effect. He mostly just wanted to be active while he sat there. So he's always a neat, thinker too. Like he's come down and visited the lab, and we came up with a project idea to look at running with body weight support, but only using one leg. And so we did some initial work with that, but then we got away from it down here, and he got busy with some other things, so we didn't follow up on it. But it was just one of those neat conversations about single leg cycling, and then ultimately to single leg running. And so he was really interested in whether or not you could run with one leg with body weight support. So that's a little bit of a background. And this paper that he talked about in Faster was about crank arm lengths. And it's actually a very surprising result of what he did. But he looked at a number of different cranks, and we talked about the length and defined that. But another part that he talked about in this paper is what he calls pedal speed. And the pedal speed is a function of how long the pedal is and how fast the pedal's spinning around. So for those mathematically inclined people, it's tangential velocity of the crank. And so he's really interested in how fast the pedal is moving tangentially, as opposed to not even RPM. We talked a little bit about RPMs. You can have the same RPM, but if you have a longer crank arm, you're going to have a faster pedal speed with the longer crank arm, because of the way tangential velocity equation is. It's how long the crank is and how fast it's spinning in terms of RPM. And so he really believes a lot of the biomechanics and physiology are related to pedal speed more so than even RPM or crank arm. All right, so do you want to unfold the results of it?
Well, yes and no, because I'm a little bit confused on this paper, to be honest with you. And the cool thing, is that kind of the take home is that, and then this is something we actually started talking about, is that our body adapts really well, right? Even though we're going to, when we change the crank arm length, in particular when you make it longer, because speed at the pedal or speed at the foot is actually going to be increased. So does the what they call it, the extension moments of the knee and the extension moments of the hip also increase. So the hip moves faster, the knee moves faster. And so then I'm thinking about that like as a athletic trainer and thinking about injury. Right? So if those things are moving faster, is there a greater potential for injury? Because now my body is having to stabilize things maybe a little bit faster. We do know a lot of our overuse injuries are having to do with stability or lack of stability. So my kind of take home from that is that if everything's moving faster, but I can overcome that, and physiologically, basically, I'm the same.
Mm-hmm.
My power output is basically the same.
Yeah.
That maybe shorter crank arms might be better
Yeah.
to a certain extent. Obviously, there'll be a, and I think that's the thing is, and this obviously this paper didn't really talk about it, but I think there is a U-shaped distribution here
Mm-hmm.
of ultimately what's better, and then we can also think about like what is better when we're talking about cycling. Like, is comfort better?
Yeah.
Is performance better? Or is, in my world, lack of injury better?
Yeah. Right. Right. Well,
And
and I like you said it may be a U-shaped. It's probably even a more complex curve than that, because
yeah, it's probably, yeah.
when you get really short, let's say you use a 10 crank arm length, now you're just, doing that. And we've all seen, videos of people riding these little mini
Yeah.
bikes. That's really awkward. And that's
But
obviously,
tangential speed should be lower, right?
that it would be. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Because the crank arm length is super short. So,
And really, even though in the video or the
yeah.
cartoon it looks like that, then
Yeah.
knee speed or angular velocity and hip would actually be less.
Yeah. Yeah. And
But
so,
there'd be a point where it's not mechanically efficient, and I think
that's
that's
right.
that's the kind of take home when you get to this is within the normal values, or
Mhm.
I don't know what were the lengths they used, but within the lengths that they looked at, basically physiologically there's very little change
Yeah.
as far
Right.
as what is, what our central nervous system is actually doing and our heart and lungs
Mm-hmm.
are actually
Mm-hmm.
doing. And even would they, I can't remember the term they used, but neuro metabolic something, I can't remember, but what was the term? Neural and mechanical mechanisms.
Okay.
But really there's very little difference in
It's,
in those two things.
yeah. Do you want to bring up one of their results of one of their figures?
Yeah, sure.
I've got one. I actually,
Go ahead and you bring it up.
oh, wait. Okay. Hold on. Yeah. Oh, jeez. Where'd my paper go?
I mean, I can if you want. I've got the crank lengths, pedaling rate, pedal speed, just a background of what they did. So maybe that'd be a good one to show to start. If you want, I got it ready.
Yeah. Oh, why is mine here? I got the asymmetric one up instead by accident. So,
Let me share.
okay. All right. And I'm bringing it up now too.
Okay.
Okay. I got it.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Oh, I didn't allow you to share anyhow, so I guess I got it. Okay, so this is a looks like a complex plot. Can you see the plot?
You went for the big one. I was just going to start off with actually what they.
Oh, which one? This one? No.
Very first table, just to kind of give people an idea. Go one more page up. That one.
This one?
Just to
Okay.
give people an idea of the crank lengths. So it was
Okay.
150 all the way up to 190.
So 150, 165, 170, 175, 190.
And important to see the pedaling rate, the RPM was the same.
90, 90, 90, 90.
And like you said, the pedal speed
Yep.
was different
Yep.
in that case. And then the next condition, they controlled the pedal speed.
Yep. That's right here. Pedal speed 1.6, 1.61, 1.6, 1.59. That's all 1.6.
And to me, that's the elegance of the study.
Yep.
Is that they actually did both sides of it.
Right. So they changed the cadence for the second experiment. So that,
Well, I think the cadence changed because they controlled pedaling speed.
yeah, either way, that's right.
Yeah.
Because you're right. The way they have it set up, that they are controlling speed. But and so that's changing because this speed is a function of how long the crank is and how fast you're pedaling.
Right.
So, okay. All right. So which one do you want to go to?
Either of those are
Yeah.
starting to get us.
Oh yeah, because well, this is
effective crank length on this.
Yeah, because it's just the two different experiments.
Yeah.
one where you control RPM and one where you control pedal speed.
Yeah.
All right, so in this first set of figures, it's power. And let me make sure this is ankle, knee, and hip, I believe, in that order. And then the moment, and the moment is how much torque you're generating about each joint. Moment and torque are the exact same thing. Moment's a better mathematical term, but it's just how much force you're applying, and you're multiplied by your moment arm, or how your line of pull is around your joint. And so as I try to flex, I'm going to create what, and you used this term earlier, this would be creating a flexor moment where I'm going to, my muscle is trying to flex, and I can create extensor moments where I'm trying to extend a joint as well. And so that's just a very common measure that we do. Angular velocity of each joint, again, this is ankle, knee, and hip. And then excursion, so range of motion. So it's in radians, but radians and degrees are easy to convert between each other, but radians are just a convenient set of units to use in angular movement for the math. So, all right, so then you got all these different conditions up here, and each line represents a different condition. And man, these just look really similar, which is the whole point of the outcome of the study.
Yep.
Is that they look really similar. You see some differences here, certain, this is, okay, so this is the parameter, this is power, and then on the x-axis is the crank position, 0 being top dead center, and 360 being top dead center. So this is one revolution. So this is the extension area where your downstroke and then your upstroke on the later part of this.
Yeah, super. To me, like, yeah, you're right. The take home is like, just look at the similarities. But when you really look at it, it's like we said, is there is changes in speed at each individual joint, and at power at each individual joint.
Mm-hmm.
But the end, the result was basically no difference, even as far as the physiologic cost.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
That's right. So when you controlled for pedal speed, no influence. No, the crank arm length didn't have any effect on any of the measures that they were looking at, which is really pretty cool.
Yeah. What I'd love to see is them do this exact same study, but then have you run off of it.
Yes, and then see what your run performance is.
Because I'm thinking, if I'm moving my hip less and I have less hip, maybe that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll have some muscle fibers that aren't quite as fatigued in my hip.
Mm-hmm.
That I'll have access to, that might be storing a little bit of extra glycogen or something. I don't know.
Yeah. No.
But yeah.
All right. So this is not uncommon that when we change something and we tell the person to do some task, that they adapt. And they adapt in a way that they end up in the same place doing the same thing. And so we see this all the time with running shoes, in that we can put someone in a pair of running shoes and they change just subtly, but yet the end result of whatever parameter we're interested in is exactly the same.
It goes back to my study we talked about last week, my personal study.
Yeah.
And how my training shoes are the most efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And they shouldn't be. But it's what I've put 500 miles in.
Yeah, right.
So for me, the metric was now, if we want to go back to that, it's more about looking at the super shoes or the racing shoes, because I hadn't had very many miles in any of them, and then ultimately which one naturally was the best.
Right.
And unfortunately this week, my schedule did not allow me to continue my experiment.
Uh-oh.
But I'm down to 2 shoes, and still, yeah. And it basically goes, I'm almost, I sort of doing what they are doing.
Yeah. Right. Right.
I'm just looking at a different physiologic parameter.
Mm-hmm.
But I can look at my if I had a belt speed, which I do, I can
Mm-hmm.
look at my cadence. I can look at, so that's my RPM. And actually I started looking at power data as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it's super interesting stuff. But you're absolutely right. The take home message is that our body adapts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the truth, if you really think about it, probably could be figured out on an individual basis. You take one athlete, you put them on a bike, you look at their some kind of metabolic test, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's just heart rate or VO2 or whatever, and you put them on 175 cranks.
Yep.
You put them on 165 cranks, and what I contend is as long as they're on 170 cranks normally, right? So you put them on two extremes
Yeah. Right.
and see which way they go.
No, I love it. But that, and what you're saying here is actually what this experiment doesn't have is what are people selecting?
Yeah.
And I think that would be,
Or what do they have a history of?
that's a really good point. Because it's funny, actually, I don't think he mentions that in this
I don't remember reading that.
paper. No, I don't think so. But yeah, so what do they normally ride? And then what would they select? Now he did do a big training session with this, so they did get exposure to the different cranks, especially the extreme ones. I think he spent more time letting them learn a pattern for those.
So I'm going to assume most of his participants actually were on 172.5s.
They most likely were, yeah.
Which he didn't test.
Yeah, right.
Which is probably good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Because for me, if I was to do this test, I would do 150s, 165s, no 170s, 175 and 190s. So I take the extremes and see physiologically where people went on the more, extreme to extreme. But it's so funny because John, I would love to do this for myself.
Yeah, right. We need to get one of those adjustable.
Yeah, where you could easily just change it. Think about it. You get on your kicker and you say, what's your FTP? Okay, let's say your FTP is 250. Okay, we're gonna put you at 80% of your FTP,
right?
Because that's what you're gonna race your Ironman at, right? And we're gonna say, okay, John, we're gonna go 30 minutes this crank, 30 minutes this one, 30 minutes this one, 30 minutes this one, and we just keep, because you're training for your Ironman, you're gonna do, let's say, a 4-hour ride, and we're just gonna keep changing you randomly. Right. And then just measure you physiologically. What happens? What happens to your heart rate? What happens to your core temperature? What happens, because that's actually another one we didn't even thought about is if you're moving more, what is core temperature? Who knows?
Right. Because maybe you've got a little bit more convection going on, and
who knows, right? So, that would be, to me, that would be an awesome test to do. We have a grad student that's interested in doing some cycling stuff and position. Maybe we can go down this road.
Hey, we might know someone.
But personally, after my shoe study, this might be my next N of 1 study that I'll do on myself. But now I'm looking at $4,000 worth of cranks, so maybe not. The shoes were easy; they're like a couple $100 a pair. I mean, still,
And then every crank needs to have a power meter. No, you don't want to do
I'd
that.
have to do pedals.
Use the same power meter.
Yeah, or do I have to do pedals? Actually, I probably would want. Yeah, I could do pedals or do a hub base. Or actually, in that case, I wouldn't because I'd have it on my kicker. But it's really, the thing is it takes time to switch those dang crank arms out. That's what you said. You need the ones that can actually change really quickly.
So we talked a little bit about, a shorter crank would open up the hip angle. And so the point of this paper, one of Jim's, and really it was his student's dissertation. So I say Jim, but it was his student who did the project, but Jim is the senior author on it. The take-home message of this was, it didn't really matter what the crank arm length was. Once you changed it and you gave someone a chance to adapt to it, they adapted to it.
Yeah.
So now it becomes why there he is. There he is. Cosmo's home. So now it becomes, why would you choose a 160? Why would you choose a 175? Now, again, this study doesn't speak to what's the self-selected crank arm, like if you let someone pick their own length, what they would pick. But what would be some reasons to go shorter? We talked about the gut and less hip. What are some other reasons?
I'm going to throw out a term, femoral acetabular impingement.
Oh, I like it. Okay.
So it's a pretty common thing, unfortunately, in sports medicine, where when you do excessive movement in the hip for long periods of time, you can actually create impingement in the hip that actually happens. So when you think about your hip joint, you've got your acetabulum here, which is the socket. You've got the head of the femur, fits in like this. So if you're excessively moving, where you actually you're hitting kind of bone to bone here,
Yeah.
you can actually create ossifites. So basically, like a bone spur on this side, or on this side where it's hitting, you could do the same thing. You basically get a thickening of the bone, because you're basically hitting the bone. And when you have a lot of motion, you get this. So we see this in hockey players.
Okay.
Especially goalies.
Oh,
See it in soccer players where there's a lot of motion. So and there are cases of it definitely in cycling. So that would be one. Number two, a lot of people actually have labral issues. So that so in that same acetabulum, there is, most people know what a meniscus is, but in your hip, you also have like a meniscus.
Okay.
And many people, especially older athletes, have labral tears and they don't even know it.
Okay.
But if you had more motion, you potentially could do damage to the labrum. So those are the two, just off the top of my head, as far as injury. We could talk about the psoas and injury there, and which is muscular injury from increased motion. But I think actually just purely when I think about from a mechanical aspect of maybe less motion is better in a sport like triathlon. I don't know.
Well, I think the other big one is aerodynamics.
Oh, absolutely. You could be lower.
That's right. Because with a shorter crank arm, you can get your upper body to be flatter because now your hip is not coming up as high, your thigh's not coming up as high. And so now you could get to a flatter position.
Or maybe not flatter, just lower.
Yeah.
Because if you go a centimeter less.
That's right.
You can actually get your body a centimeter less. And we know for the most part, lower is going to be a little bit better.
Yeah.
So there's the aerodynamics for sure. And then I would also contend on too long of a crank arm, especially if you're not set exactly perfect. I think that you could get more hip rock. You're reaching a little bit. If you're set perfect and you've got a really good fit, probably less chance. But I think the shorter the crank arm, probably the more wiggle room you would have. I'm just guessing.
I gotta get some short cranks. I gotta try.
Challenge accepted. We'll both get short cranks.
And then I'll put my power meter aside and just try and see what it feels like.
So the problem for me now is like, really now it's a $2,000 thing because I got two bikes. I got a road bike and a time trial bike. Well, so this is getting expensive.
Well, I got to go look at my mountain bike because my mountain bike does have shorter cranks. I think I got to go look at them. They may be 165s actually. So
it's interesting, right? Mountain biking, they definitely traditionally have had shorter.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
And the cool thing is that the industry, I guess kind of a take-home message, the industry is starting to figure this out. And if you're to look at like a new bike now, you'll see that the smaller the frame, usually the shorter the crank arm. But this is a relatively new phenomenon and not all manufacturers are doing it.
Right.
But if you were like me and have a 29-inch inseam and you're 5'8", being on 172 just because the bike comes with that, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, and once again, go online. There's lots of different ways to do it. The simplest way to do it actually is literally just to measure your inseam.
Well,
And
there
there's
was
lots of ways to
also
do that.
femur length, and I know there's been research on femur length relative to crank arm length.
But that's a little harder for most people to measure, like,
Yeah,
precisely.
Right.
Whereas your inseam it's pretty easy to measure. I actually did it because trying to get ready for this podcast.
Mhm.
I just stood up and just put a pole, right between my legs up against the wall,
Mhm.
between my legs, and then just kept it there as I kind of stood over it, and then got there, put a little mark on the wall, and
Mhm.
measured up. Found out exactly my inseam, put it into the calculator, and actually it was the 3 different calculators were either 162.5 or 165.
Oh, interesting.
Yep.
Hmm.
And so then I was like, oh my gosh.
Well, and then in that calculator, I'm curious, did they ask you what kind of pedals you had, or?
No.
Mhm.
But that would, that you actually, you bring up a really valid point, because pedal stack changes.
Yeah.
And we're talking about pedal stack. We're talking about from the spindle or the center to how high the base of the pedal is. So yeah, that could play a role for sure. But if it's interesting, right? Because if it's high, it's going to bring you higher on the top, but lower on the bottom.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to be shifted, but it is. It does play, and in the paper they did adjust the handlebars for the different crank arms to try to account for some changes in position. So
and the seat height too, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Because you have to, like we talked about right in the beginning, you have to adjust the seat height.
Yep.
If you go up or down in crank length, you have to change your seat height.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
So I think
a lot of stuff.
I think we're going to try some different crank arm lengths. I'm going to start looking and.
Yeah. I'm gonna. I don't know what to do. I want to, but
I want to get the crank arm there, because there is a system out there that you can change it, but you wouldn't obviously keep it on, but it's more for testing.
Yeah.
And so it would be interesting to get a set of that and see what it
well,
is.
yeah, it's really expensive, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The Wahoo kicker bike actually has this really elegant system.
Does it have?
You can change. Yeah, and they did it by. You got to look at the crank on it, and I was like, man, we should, like, this would be good just to like have just a crank piece.
Yeah, right.
Because what it is, it's got an arc to the end of the crank.
Oh,
and
right.
So then you can change the position where you put your pedal, and you can go all the way down. I think it's 165 to 175. And it's super smart the way they did it, because they don't care about aerodynamics or anything. It's an indoor bike. Right. And I was like, man, that's very elegant. If I had a fitting bike, like that'd be so easy just to change.
Well, what do you got planned this weekend?
Well, I was considering going to St. George tomorrow. But I don't know. It's supposed to be really windy again here, and not so windy up there. So I don't know. It's such a pain to drive up there and I'd go out, spend the night, and then drive back.
If you had a trailer, you could do it and less painful.
No, it'd be more painful because it costs more in gas.
That's right. And
I got enough hotel points that I can stay for free.
And driving, that's good. And driving through I'm not looking forward to taking that through the gorge with the winds. So I'll be holding onto my steering wheel on that.
Drive the other way. I love driving the other way through the Beaver Dam. Have you ever driven that way?
No, I haven't. I have to.
It's so good. I love driving that way. It's, to me, it adds a little bit of time.
Yep.
But the drive, it's nice.
Okay, I'll have to look into that. That could be.
You come out in Ivens.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I like the drive. And actually, I've ridden that road. It's actually a fun.
That's the Mind the Gap road, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah. So what I've done before is Marie and I have been up in St. George, and I'll be like, okay, I'm going to ride my bike to Mesquite,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll meet you there in like 2 hours or 2.5 hours.
Oh, nice.
It's a big net downhill.
Yeah.
And you ride that road, and there's no traffic. Pro tip, ride that road.
Yeah.
But that's what I got going on. But honestly, probably cooler heads will prevail, and I will run and swim tomorrow and bike on Sunday.
Yeah.
And finish off. This is actually finishing up the build. This Sunday is my
Yeah.
last build day, and then start the taper.
You are ready to taper. That's going to be great.
Yeah, you know how you're ready to taper, because everything is starting to hurt.
Oh, yeah.
Like this week, it's been my hip, my calf, my shoulder. It's like, okay, I'm right on the precipice. And like we talked about last week, you got to listen to your body. Like, I am not looking at Training Peaks this week. I'm just listening to my body.
Mm-hmm.
Took a little extra day off this week, which I normally wouldn't have. And I have got to be healthy. I'm not going to gain any fitness in the next 2 weeks.
No.
It's just get healthy.
You're gaining more by not training more.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm on my way up in my build, so I am starting to get back to some longer stuff. So,
where are you headed this weekend?
I haven't decided. I'll look at the wind and see which way it's going. I did the River Mountain Loop last weekend. Laura and I did it, and unfortunately, one section of it is pretty torn up with.
That's a bad section. Last time I haven't ridden it in over a year, and I won't go back to that section.
Yeah, there is a way to get around it, but now you're back on the road, and so
you're probably safer on the road though, and that section is getting so bad.
Yeah, so but I like riding that trail for the most part. So if I can, maybe I'll try doing it counterclockwise, and going up that section would be less worse than going down it, because you can sort of get over those bumps a little differently. So. But I'll do a big bike ride. I'll do, tomorrow I'll probably do a pretty big run, or try to see how that's going. I need to run legs back.
It's the worst part, getting those legs back.
Free.
Yeah. Because what do you got? Is it 8 weeks or 7 weeks till Hawaii?
I think 7 weeks to Hawaii, if that happens. And then really the big one is Coeur d'Alene. So
what's the date of Coeur d'Alene for people following along?
June. So 7 weeks to Hawaii. Let me check my Training Peaks. I can tell you. 7 weeks for Hawaii to, where's my other? That's Coeur d'Alene, 27th of June.
Okay.
So 10 weeks. So that's good.
I'm trying to book a place in Coeur d'Alene for the first week of June right now. I'm having no luck.
I'm just taking my trailer.
See?
I'm just going.
I should, for my my sabbatical here coming up, I should have a trailer. I tried to convince Marie that we should buy a trailer for our sabbatical coming up.
Yeah.
And didn't go over so well. So we're Airbnb-ing all around. So
there is an advantage to doing it that way. So
yeah. All right. Well, thanks, John. That was awesome as usual. Next week we are gonna do chain waxing. Live,
that's right.
Live from Ted's garage.
That'll be fun.
We're gonna do a new chain and a used chain. I'm gonna show both techniques.
Yeah, I want to see your cleaning system.
Yeah, the cleaning system, the glass jar, the glass jars, and the ultrasonic. We're gonna do both methods. So yeah, we'll do live from the garage next week. So that means I got to clean the garage again. Great.
Yeah. Awesome.
But it'll be good because I'm on a taper week. I got to find things to do. That's the thing on the taper week. You've got to find little projects.
Yep. That still are recovery.
Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, John.
Good talking.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Have a nice evening.
You too.